أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين الميامين المنتجبين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يتخذ من دون الله أندادا يحبونهم كحب الله والذين آمنوا أشد حبا لله. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. In our discussion concerning the art of yearning for Allah, or ash-shawq ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tonight we wish to move on to our next objective. Up until now we have been discussing anecdotes in an attempt to validate the concept of yearning for Allah in Quran and Hadith, and then we were discussing the symptoms that one would typically notice in those who yearn for Allah. There are many other symptoms that I now choose not to discuss because of the limited time we have. Potentially next week at this time, inshallah, we may be even commemorating the night of Eid. So given that we have only a week left of this blessed month, it is time to take the subject a step further. But in terms of the symptoms, I think most of us, if we were to go home and draw a table on a piece of paper and divide it into two columns, and on one column we were to put the symptoms that we typically notice in people who are in love or people who are obsessed with something, even if it's not a human relationship, with an hobby or career or fame or wealth or cars or whatever it may be. If we were to put the symptoms that you typically notice in people who are in love or obsessed on one side, we will very easily be able to see what is then required from people who yearn for Allah, or what would be expected from people who yearn for Allah. The final two objectives that we promised to discuss were, what are the prerequisites for one to yearn for Allah? And then finally, what are the practical steps that we can undertake in order to fulfill these prerequisites? Given the importance of this night as well, we will just lay the foundation tonight, inshallah, but discuss it further from tomorrow onwards. The prerequisites for a person to yearn for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are two. The first prerequisite is that one must remove all traces of materialism from one's heart. This means that one must remove from one's heart the love of everything besides Allah. If there is love for anything in one's heart, it must be only for the sake of Allah, but not in competition with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second prerequisite for one to yearn for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that the heart must become soft. Because there are numerous ahadith to suggest that those whose hearts become hard in the spiritual sense will not be able to yearn for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All the practical steps that we discuss thereafter will be to try and achieve these two objectives. What I wish to do tonight is to explain very briefly how I came about with these prerequisites. Because these two prerequisites are not mentioned in one hadith from a ma'soom, nor are they recommended by any scholar or any alim. These are simply my humble observations based on what I have seen in Quran and Hadith. So it is important that I explain how I came about to these conclusions. Let me first talk about the softening of the heart. In Hadith, you will find numerous examples suggesting that before one can know any kind of truth, one's heart must first soften. And as soon as a person's heart becomes hard, so to speak, they will be denied the truth. The reasons why the heart becomes hard are also numerous, and inshallah, if time permits, we will discuss those. But what is key to note for tonight is that from the Quran's perspective, the origin and the source of any kind of true realization is the heart and not the mind. The mind is a tool that will allow us to analyze, to deduce, to formulate, and to conclude. And it has its place in Islam as well. It is not a bad thing. It is a good thing, and it is a necessity. It distinguishes us from animals. However, because of the nature of the mind and how it approaches things in a very black and white, mathematical manner, and its limitation to the human language, so that it is not able to explain that which the human language cannot describe, it has its limitations. The mind will be able to tell you that if A plus B equals to C, then B equals to A minus C. But the source of conviction, the organ in the human body, whether physical or spiritual, that is the source of conviction or love or compassion or understanding or ma'rifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not the mind, it is the heart. So for example, just to quote a few verses to show you the importance of the heart, you notice both the prerequisites I mentioned for yearning for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are related to the heart. The removal of materialism from the heart and softening the heart. In Surah Al-A'raf, for example, which is chapter 7 of the Quran, verse 179, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَكَدْ ذَرَأْنَا لِجَهَنَّمَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. And we have prepared the fire of hell for a lot amongst the jinn and the ins, because they have hearts but they do not understand. لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ بِهَا. So, tafaqquh or understanding here is being attributed to the heart, not to the mind. Then elsewhere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَكْفَالُهَا. Do they not reflect on the Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? He does not say, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ أَمْ عَلَى أُقُولٍ أَكْفَالُهَا. He says, أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَكْفَالُهَا. That means true tadabbur of Quran, true reflection of the Quran, is not just sitting and debating and arguing and having a polemic discussion about the verses of the Quran. True tadabbur of Quran is to meditate and reflect on verses of the Quran so that there is a realization. When realization of a truth occurs, it doesn't happen with the mind, it happens with the whole being of a person. It is not localized in the human brain. One sits in meditation and there is a realization in the whole human being. It's a complete experience. And the proof of that is that there are no more doubts and counter arguments in the mind going back and forth, but there is a change in one's life and one then moves in a different direction. That is the meaning of realization. That realization which makes a person turn 180 degrees from the path of shaitan to the path of Allah only happens when the heart is affected, not when the mind is affected. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do they not reflect on the Quran? أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Are there locks on their heart? So the Quran values the heart as an organ more than the mind. أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَتَكُونَ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا. This is in Surah Al-Hajj, which is chapter 22, verse 46. Do they not travel in the land that Allah may then give them hearts with which they may understand? Here, it's not even yafqahun, it is ya'qilun. The word aql is being used here. That Allah will give them hearts that will have aql. Do they not travel in the land? أَفَلَمْ يَسِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَتَكُونَ لَهُمْ قُلُوبٌ يَعْقِلُونَ بِهَا. That means again, it is the heart that truly perceives and understands. And elsewhere Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارِ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبِ الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ. But it is not the eyes which become blind, rather it is the hearts in their chests that become blind. So these are just a few sample verses from the Quran to prove the point that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the organ that is precious is the heart. The heart must be protected by all means. And it is the heart that will take us to this yearning of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the coming nights, inshallah, we will look at what deeds we need to perform and what activities we need to preoccupy ourselves with in order to soften this heart so that it becomes ready and fulfills that prerequisite for yearning for our Creator. The second prerequisite that I mentioned was the removal of materialism from one's heart. Sometimes when you read in hadith, you will find a lot of condemnation of the world. It is important to understand that in classic Arabic language, where the world is being condemned, it is not the physical world. It is the materialism and the attachment to the world that is being condemned. Now, when we begin discussing the practices that we will need to practice in order to fulfill these prerequisites, we will see that the practices are the same for both prerequisites. It is exactly the same deeds we need to perform both to soften the heart and to remove materialism from it. Why then do we distinguish this? We distinguish these two firstly because this removal of materialism is extremely important and it needs to be mentioned separately. Secondly, it is possible for a person to soften their heart temporarily, but if materialism is not removed, it will bounce back and become hard again. It is only by the removal of this attachment to the world that the heart can be maintained with that desired softness on an ongoing basis. The heart also has one peculiarity that we need to be aware of, and that is as follows. The heart, the human heart, has the capacity to be obsessed and to love and to be madly in love with only one thing at a time. A human being may love multiple things, but it will be, he or she will be obsessed about something only with one thing at a time. Once they realize this is no longer an obsession, or they grow from being a child to a youth, or from a youth to being an adult, their obsession might change. But at all times they will be obsessed with only one thing. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands this from people, that before I let you taste a drop of my love, you must first remove the love of all else. He is not being unfair and unkind and selfish in saying, I will not share my love with anything else. He is pointing to a limitation of the human being, that the way I wired you and the way I created you, you cannot love two things obsessively at the same time. So you have blocked me from your heart. You have blocked access of my love to you, even though it is gushing with full force. You have blocked it because of your love of all else besides me. If that is removed, then you will it will be there. It will be ready and waiting for you. The Prophet Musa alayhi salam was once passing by a place and he saw a man in prostration begging Allah for his love. He went away, finished his work, he came back, the man was still in sajda, begging Allah. So he made a comment there. He said, if it was me he was begging for, I would have given him what he wants by now. If it was me he was asking, this much he is begging. I went and I came back, he is still in sajda asking for Allah. He heard a voice from his Creator. Allah spoke to his Kalim and said to him, O Musa, if his neck cracks and his head falls off, I will still not give him what he wants. Why, O Allah? Because his heart still loves the world. Until he removes it, he cannot experience my love. So at face value, it appears that Musa alayhi salam is more kind and giving than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the reality is that Allah is pointing to this limitation, that you cannot love me and something else. Call him a jealous God if you like, but that is how it is. He created you and wired you like that. That if you want to experience my love, first all else must be removed from your heart. So, the block is from our side. It is not from Allah's side. That is why we are told in hadith, Al-qalb haramullah. Haram, what is haram? You go to the haram of Imam Hussein, you go to the haram of Abu Abdullah. Haram is a sanctuary, right? Masjidul Haram, a sacred place. The heart is the sanctuary of God. That is where Allah resides. Al-qalb haramullah. فَلَا تَسْكُنُ حَرَمُ اللَّهِ غَيْرُ اللَّهِ. Be careful that none should reside in the sanctuary of God but God Himself. That is the trust that Allah leaves you with. When Allah created a human being, the reason why this human being is special, because a human being's heart is a mirror in which Allah can reflect His attributes and see His attributes reflect back at Him. This is an irfani point, so I won't get into it into too much detail. But when there is rust on the heart, when this mirror becomes dusty, then the image that is reflected is obviously flawed. And so what Allah wants from us is to polish this mirror so that the reflection that comes back then is clear and perfect. And that is when we then have the joy and the pleasure of knowing what loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all about. If you can recite aloud, salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wa ali Muhammad. Now given that this night is a very special night, Laylatul Qadr, I want to mention just one of the practices without actually going into the details of it. We will inshallah develop this subject over this coming week. One of the practices that we will mention time and again is the constant remembrance of Allah, or the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We mentioned this a little bit last night, and we said that this is one form of worship for which Islam and the hadith copiously are in agreement that this form of worship has no limit. This form of worship, there is nothing like too much in terms of dhikr of Allah. Do dhikr of Allah as much as you can, and as frequently as you can, and at all times that you can. So much so that even when one is in the washroom, one is permitted to remember Allah. Whereas Allah is such a sacred name that it should not be mentioned in vain. There are du'as you will see in the books that says when you enter the washroom, you enter with your left foot, you recite this du'a. When you leave the washroom, you recite this du'a. When you're taking a shower, you recite this du'a. This is a place of najasat, but there is still mention of Allah there. And when a person said to Imam Jaffer as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, that some people say we should not mention Allah's name when we are in the washroom. He said, Nafaqu Allah. These are hypocrites by Allah. They have not understood. You need to keep that communication and that connection with Allah at all times. Constantly. If we knew the power of dhikr and the power of dua, ad-dua silahul mu'min. This is not metaphorical, this is literal. For us it is literal. Dua is the weapon of a believer. This weapon of a believer is not symbolic, it's literal. You have the small pistol, then you have the rifle, then you have the big gun, then you have the fighter jets, then you have the atomic bomb, then you have the nuclear bomb, then you have dua. Dua is a weapon. If you know how to use it, you can move mountains with it. Those who don't know the power of dua, they may ridicule it and say, what is this? Those who know, they know that this dua can do miracles. Just a small anecdote, given that this is a joyous occasion as well. It is said that there was a man who fell sick, and he lived in a town where there was a great sheikh who was an arif and a Sufi, and he had attained a level where he could recite the names of Allah and cure people. This man fell very ill, and a lot of doctors and physicians came to look at him, and they tried every possible medicine and cure, and they couldn't cure him. When they gave up all hope, the family decided to call this sheikh. Typically once science fails, then we'll turn to Allah. So they called the sheikh and said, come and help this man. So the sheikh came and he looked at the patient. The room was full of doctors and physicians. And he said, I will now recite some names of Allah and cure this man. So the doctors began laughing at him. They said, what an idiot. We are professionals. We have tried everything possible. We know this man cannot be cured. You're going to recite a few names and he's going to get cured? What nonsense is this? I mean, come on, in this day and age. So the sheikh looked at them. He said, you foolish donkeys, what do you know about curing a person? Now when he called them donkeys, they got very upset. Their face became red. They were annoyed, and their condition changed. When their condition changed, the sheikh smiled and said, if the word donkey can change your condition, why can't the word Allah change his condition? What do you know about the dhikr of Allah? I just said the word donkey, your condition changed. You're physiologically you have become a different person. You're angry, you're upset, you're flushed, you're, goodness knows, dehydrated, whatever. Just the word donkey. Why cannot the word Allah cure a person? I will cure him and you will see him. When a person does not get cured because of our du'as, it is because we have not prayed with conviction. Either that or it was not good for us. But that is a person who has yaqeen, he will know. And if it was not good for you, Allah will give you that peace of heart to accept why the dua was not accepted. But it is impossible to say that I prayed with conviction and Allah did not answer my prayer. Du'as will, that is why Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Ali Muhammad. He says, when you pray to Allah, pray as if your dua has already been accepted. If Allah does not want to answer you, He will not give you an opportunity to ask Him. You yourself, will you let somebody come to your door and beg from you again and again when you know you don't want to give it to him? You will not treat a person and humiliate him like that. Allah would not have given you this Laylatul Qadr if He didn't want to answer you. Allah wants to answer you. The condition is, when you pray to Him, be alert and know what you are saying and pray with all your strength and might and put your whole heart into it. In Uddatul Da'i, I mention this because many of you have this book with you now. Go to look at it on page 32, hadith number 33, where Allah speaks to the Prophet Isa alayhi salam. He says to, O Isa, pray to me with all your heart. Then he says, Ya Isa, وَكُنْ فِي ذَلِكَ حَيًّا وَلَا تَكُنْ مَيِّتًا. When you pray to me, pray with a heart that is alive. Do not pray to me with a dead heart. And then see what it will move you from within. That is why we recite Dua Josh and Kabir as well on this night. Ya imada man la imada lah. Ya sanada man la sanada lah. O you who is a support for one who has no support. Ya kanza man la kanza lah. O you who is a treasure for one who has no treasure. Ya hirza man la hirza lah. O you who is a protector for one who has no protector. Ya ghiyatha man la ghiyatha lah. O you who helps one who has no one to help him. Help me. And then see whether Allah helps you or doesn't help you. Come and tell me if it doesn't work. But do it with all your heart and all your might. But this is, I think, sufficient for tonight. I will just mention a few recommendations for Laylatul Qadr, even though you will inshallah hear more about this from Brother Khalil Jaffer. But this idea of dhikr, just to conclude my subject on yearning for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that I can pick it up from here tomorrow onwards. This idea that dhikr and the name of Allah can cure a person is very much rooted in hadith. If anybody, whether he is a scientist or whatever he is, if he says du'as cannot cure, and if he is a Shia, ask him one question only. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad, he says in Dua Kumail, Ya man ismuhu dawa wa dhikruhu shifa. O you whose name is a cure, dawa. If you speak Swahili, you know what this means. Ya man ismuhu dawa wa dhikruhu shifa. And O you whose remembrance is also a means of cure and health and shifa. Should we edit this dua and remove these lines? Or should we leave it and accept that indeed, O you whose name is a cure? Allah's name can cure leprosy, Allah's name can cure diabetes, Allah's name can cure cancer, Allah's name can bring a dead man back to life. The limitation is not in the dua or in Allah's name. The limitation is in the capacity of the person who is praying. If he believes in it, he can do anything he wishes. Now, given the importance of tonight, I said I just want to mention a few importance. I think it's even though I may have spoken for my half an hour already, but given that we are here for the Amal and this is the most precious night, I have to mention this. I think it's important. When we talk about spirituality and spiritual growth, we normally say the best months are Rajab, Sha'ban, Ramadan. When the month of Rajab starts, we say start fasting, start preparing, start preparing. When Sha'ban comes, we intensify and say now fast more often, pray more often, read this dua, read that dua. Ramadan comes, this is now our spring and our harvesting time. Within Ramadan as well, tonight is the most important night of the year. Even though Laylatul Qadr could be 19th night or 21st or 23rd or 25th or 27th or 29th, from a Shia perspective, a lot of the hadith suggest that 23rd night is the greatest night, is Laylatul Qadr. Do not let this night pass while we are asleep or watching television or playing on our Xbox or whatever it is. This is Laylatul Ibadah. If you compress the whole year and pull out the one night, it is tonight. There is no night greater than this night. If you miss this night, I cannot tell you which other night there is on which we can worship Allah like this. And this is spiritual harvesting tonight. Take as much as you can. Because the doors of the heavens are not any wider open than they are tonight. It is pouring buckets tonight. Take as much as you can. And here is the evidence. This is Mafatihul Jinan of Sheikh Abbas Qumi concerning the 23rd night of Ramadan. He says this is the greatest of all nights. It is greater than even the two nights that preceded it, meaning the 19th and the 21st in terms of Laylatul Qadr. وَفِيهَا يُقَدِّرُ كُلُّ أَمْرٍ حَكِيمٍ. This is the night in which all the affairs are decreed for a person. Amongst its recommendation, he quotes a hadith. He says that from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أن من قرأ هاتين السورتين العنكبوت والروم في هذه الليلة كان من أهل الجنة. Whosoever recites Surah Al-Ankabut and Surah Al-Rum on this night will be amongst the people of paradise. The condition of Iman and Taqwa is implied in this as it is for all such hadith. Then there is a recommendation of reciting Surah Hamim Ad-Dukhan and reciting Surah Al-Qadr Inna Anzalna 1,000 times. A very important aspect of this night is as much as you can recite the dua, Allahumma kun li waliyik. Because on this night the angels descend to the Imam of our time, Imam al-Hujjah salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We are in the thoughts of our Imam this night, so let him be in our thoughts as well. And we are told here very clearly, Allahumma kun li waliyik, this dua of the 12th Imam, recite it as often as you can tonight. Pray to Allah to grant you a long life on this night so that you may continue serving Him. Pray to Allah for rizq on this night because that is being decreed for you. Pray to Allah for health on this night. But over and above all, pray to Allah that if our names are written amongst the wretched and the people of hell, He should free us from that and put us amongst those who shall be successful and the people of paradise. On this night is recommended ghusl. On this night is recommended staying up all night. On this night is recommended ziyarat of Al-Husayn alayhi salam. On this night is recommended to recite 100 rakats. And here is where I want to mention these things you will hear inshallah during the amal, but here is the fadila that I want to stress. because some of you may not be here for the a'mal. Sheikh Tusi in his At-Tahdhib, he narrates from Abu Basir, who narrates from Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, who says, pray on this night 100 rakats, and in every rakat recite Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad 10 times. Now we are a little easier on you, we recite it only once, or another surah, but he says 10 times. Look at the importance of this night. Abu Basir says to Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, supposing I cannot stand and recite 100 rakats. He says, sit and pray 100 rakats. He says, supposing I cannot sit, he says, sleep on your bed and pray 100 rakats. But do not miss praying 100 rakats. He says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam on the nights of Ramadan, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, from the 19th night of Ramadan until the night of Eid, he would cut himself away from the world, and that was his i'tiqaf. That is when he would start worshipping Allah with intensity. These are the nights of worshipping Allah with intensity. On the 23rd night, Rasulullah would not let anyone in his house to sleep. And if anyone fell asleep in his house, he would sprinkle water on his face and wake him up. So on this night, you can even splash someone's face with water and tell him it is sunnah of Rasul. On this night, Fatima alayha salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, would not allow any one of her family members to sleep. She would give the children and the servants less food to eat so that they don't fall asleep or they don't feel sleepy. She would prepare them ahead of time by making sure that they slept during the day of the 22nd of Ramadan so that they can stay awake during the night. And she would say, this is now Sayyidah herself, she used to say, Mahrumun man hurima khayruha. Mahrum is the opposite of marhum. Mahrum is one who is denied something, one who loses out on something good. She used to say, Mahrum is the person who misses out on this night. If a person goes home and sleeps tonight, he is mahrum truly, she says. And Allama Majlisi says, rahimahullah, he says, recite as much of the Quran as you can on this night, and recite as much of the Sahifatul Sajjadiyah as you can, in particular dua Makarimul Akhlaq and dua At-Tawbah. There are many other a'mals, but the point that I wanted to emphasize, if there was one night in a year that we are willing to sacrifice and to feel that spirituality, it is tonight. If unfortunately we didn't sleep during the day and we are already tired, we can get together as a family and try and stay awake, or we can stay at the mosque. Those of you who can stay at the mosque all night until Fajr. This is the night when there is nothing but peace and tranquility until dawn. And it is an opportunity from Allah that it fell on a weekend this year. It is not every year that the 23rd night of Ramadan will fall on a Saturday night. So as much as you can, I would urge you, my dear brothers and sisters, and I would urge myself, do not sleep this night. But show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if it was up to you, there is everything you would do within your ability to yearn for Him, insha'Allah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. One more thing I forgot. Do not forget to pray for others as well. Do not forget to pray for your families, for your loved ones. Pray for us. Pray for those who are ill. Pray for those who have passed away. Pray for your Muslim brothers and sisters all over the world who are suffering, particularly in Iraq at the moment, in Palestine, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, everywhere. Please do not forget to pray for all of them. And over and above, do not forget to pray for the 12th Imam. Pray to Allah for his safety. Pray to Allah to hasten his appearance. Very important on this night, inshallah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله.